The year is 1820. It's the year that Washington Irving publishes his iconic short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But it's also a time when the United States is bitterly divided over the issue of slavery. A compromise is made in which Missouri is admitted to the Union as a slave state, and Maine is admitted as a non-slave state. Additionally, a boundary is drawn to prevent the spread of slavery into Western territories. This is known as the Missouri Compromise. Fast forward to 1850. It's 1 year after the mysterious death of Edgar Allan Poe, and Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel, The Scarlet Letter, has just been released. But the bitter division over slavery continues to intensify, and another compromise is needed. Congress passes the Fugitive Slave Act, requiring that escaped slaves be returned to their owners even if they are now living in free states. Jump to 1857. Nathaniel Hawthorne's appointment as United States Consul in Liverpool comes to an end, and Herman Melville publishes his final novel, called The Confidence Man. That same year, in a highly controversial ruling, the Supreme Court decides that African Americans are not considered citizens of the United States, and that the Missouri Compromise, which restricted Western territories from instituting slavery, was unconstitutional. This is all part of what's known as the Dred Scott decision. You've already learned a bit about some literary figures like the Fireside Poets who were abolitionists. In today's video, we'll learn more about the anti-slavery movement, and you'll be introduced to two powerful voices of abolition, Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth, whose arguments against slavery were supported by their own lived experiences as enslaved people. And before we conclude, we'll review your lesson agenda for this week so you'll be fully prepared for the Voices of Abolition lesson. This week, through the works of Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth, you'll see how the sharing of personal stories can influence others, change opinions, and provide hope in even the darkest of circumstances. The 19th century in America was an exciting time of growth and exploration. It gave us the age of Romanticism, with its emphasis on the vastness of nature and of the imagination, and its prioritization of human emotion and individualism. But among these romantics, there was also the realization that a great number of people were being denied their individualism, their safety, their very humanness, because of the institution of slavery. So it makes sense that within this age of Romanticism, there was tremendous growth in the anti-slavery movement. As early as 1619, when enslaved Africans were first brought to the Jamestown colony, there have been people who voiced their opposition to the institution of slavery. During the 17th century, the Quakers were the first organized religious group to condemn slavery. But it wasn't until the 19th century that the anti-slavery movement really gained traction. In 1816, the American Colonization Society formed with the aim of sending formerly enslaved people to a colony in West Africa, and they succeeded in relocating over 12,000 people to what later became the nation of Liberia. But only some members of the American Colonization Society actually opposed slavery. Others were slave owners who felt that free black people living in the United States were a threat to the institution of slavery. In 1833, William Lloyd Garrison founded the American Anti-Slavery Society, an organization declaring that no man has a right to enslave or imbrute his brother, to hold or acknowledge him for a moment as a piece of merchandise. The right to enjoy liberty is inalienable. Or in simpler terms, slavery stands in contrast to the liberty upon which this country was founded. Garrison also published a newspaper called The Liberator, which rapidly spread anti-slavery sentiments around the country. You've learned about prominent abolitionists like the Fireside Poets, who with their writing and activism amplified the call for the abolition of slavery. Some abolitionists, like John Brown, believed that slavery in America could not be abolished in a peaceful manner. In 1859, Brown led an attack at the Federal Armory at Harpers Ferry, Virginia, in an attempt to stage an armed uprising. The raid failed. Some people lost their lives, and Brown was tried, convicted of treason, and hanged. However, Brown succeeded in bringing a lot of attention to the anti-slavery movement, and he became a symbol of the deep division within the United States. A lot of voices contributed to the anti-slavery movement in the 19th century, but only a few of those voices could speak from the perspective of a formerly enslaved person. One of those voices was that of Frederick Douglass. Douglass was born into slavery in Maryland sometime around 1818. Like most children of enslaved women, he was separated from his mother at a very young age. Around the age of 9, Douglass was sent to live with Hugh and Sophia Auld in Baltimore. Sophia began teaching him to read until her husband found out and put an end to it. But Douglass's mind had been awakened, and he began to associate literacy with freedom, even claiming that once you learn to read, you will be forever free. When he was about 12, he obtained a copy of the Columbian Orator, a book of speeches, debates, and poems about human rights. Suddenly, he had a logical framework for building arguments against slavery. And when he was able to successfully escape slavery in 1838, Douglass became a highly compelling voice in the anti-slavery movement. He spoke and wrote extensively and helped gain widespread support for the cause. He didn't rely on moral statements and appeals to logic to influence his audience. He won their support by sharing his own lived experience as a formerly enslaved person. Douglass made many speeches, wrote letters and editorials, and composed a few different autobiographies. This week, you'll be reading from one of those autobiographies entitled Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. Pay attention to the ways in which he weaves logic and reasoning into his personal narrative. Douglass is an expert at building a solid persuasive argument through the technique of narrative text. And he's not the only formerly enslaved person with a story to tell. In this lesson, you'll also be introduced to Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth was born into slavery in 1797 in Ulster County, New York. At birth, her name was Isabella Baumfree. Isabella was sold 3 times before she finally escaped slavery in 1826. She adopted the name Sojourner Truth for herself in 1843. Since childhood, she claimed to have experienced visions and heard voices, and as a free woman, she began to embrace a supernatural presence in her life. She became an evangelist and a vocal activist in both the anti-slavery and women's rights movements. Unlike Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth never learned to read and write. When she published her autobiography entitled The Narrative of Sojourner Truth, she had to dictate it to her trusted friend, Oliver Gilbert. When Sojourner Truth made speeches, she didn't read from a script, she spoke from her heart. She was pure, authentic, and very influential. In 1851, at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention, Sojourner Truth delivered a short speech that made a lasting impact. It's called Ain't I a Woman? And in it, Sojourner Truth shares her unique lived experiences as both a formerly enslaved person and a woman to create a powerful argument for both the anti-slavery and women's rights movements. She also throws in some poetic devices like repetition to really engage her audience. And she was very persuasive. Okay, you've been properly introduced to the anti-slavery movement, to Frederick Douglass, and to Sojourner Truth. Now, let's take a look at what you'll be doing this week. After this video, you'll begin your 5 days of PDF readings and activities. Each day, you'll reinforce what you've learned with some online practice until day 5. That's when you'll be answering your reflection questions and writing a persuasive speech. That's right, Be thinking of what position you hold that you'd like to convince others to agree with. Decide how you can use your personal details from your own lived experience to support your argument. You can also start lining up an audience to deliver that speech to. And of course, you'll have an online assessment that will close out this lesson on Voices of Abolition. Obviously, those voices of abolition got their point across. In January of 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which officially declared that all persons held as slaves are, and henceforth shall be, free. Of course, it took until 1865 for the Civil War to be resolved and for the Emancipation Proclamation to apply throughout the entire reunified country. By then, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution had been ratified, and it effectively abolished slavery in the United States. Those voices of abolition, from the Quakers to the fireside poets to the anti-slavery society to formerly enslaved people like Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth, finally succeeded in changing history.